Welcome back to the Michael Brooks Show. It's a pleasure and honor to welcome Meagan Day. She's a writer for Jacobin Magazine. She's a member for DSA and an organizer. And she is the co-author with our other buddy, Matt Karp, of Bernie is the One That Can Beat Trump. Here's Why, which is available and everybody should read in Jacobin. Meagan, thanks so much for doing this.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, Meagan, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about this article, but first, I really want to underline how profoundly important and distinct Sanders' response to Iran has been. One part is substantive. In 2017, there was a sanctions package aimed at Iran and Russia. Bernie Sanders is the only member of the Democratic caucus in the Senate and the only person running for president who voted against those sanctions. Those sanctions, that act of economic warfare after the Trump administration tore up the Iran deal, is a major precursor to this escalation. Warren voted for it. Booker voted for it. I believe Gabbard voted for a House version of it. I know how it went in the Senate. And I just want to play really briefly this video we have of Bernie Sanders talking about his history on war and get your response to it. Now, again, for the sort of, some of the sort of wankery out there, yes, Bernie Sanders has cast bad votes. He's made some mistakes. There is no one else in contention for the presidency with this type of clarity or consistency, particularly on Iran. So let's play this, and I'll throw to you, Meagan.
Recently, I've been criticized a bit because of my opposition to war and my belief that we got to do everything possible to solve international conflict without going to war. So let me be very clear. I make no apologies to anybody.
Love that beat.
That when I was a young man, before I was elected to anything, I opposed the war in Vietnam, and I know what that war did to my generation. And when I was a member of the House, I helped lead the effort against the war in Iraq because I knew that Cheney and Bush and these other folks were lying about weapons of mass destruction.
I'm opposed to giving the president a blank check to launch a unilateral invasion and occupation of Iraq, and why I will vote against this resolution.
And that war and that vote was the worst foreign policy blunder in the modern history of the United States. And as a senator, I'm proud that I helped for the first time in 45 years to utilize the War Powers Act to get the United States out of an unauthorized war in Yemen. Unfortunately, after passing in the House and the Senate, Trump vetoed that legislation. And I'll tell you something, that right now, I'm going to do everything that I can to prevent a war with Iran. Because if you think that the war in Iraq was a disaster, my guess is that the war in Iran would be even worse. So let's work together and prevent that war. If people want to criticize me for that, go for it, that's okay. I don't apologize to anybody. Thank you.
And a tight beat. Meagan Day, your thoughts?
Yeah, I love that beat. I was a little surprised that you weren't, when you were like, oh, I love that beat. For a minute, I thought you were playing it over it. And I was like, good job, Michael. That's awesome.
I wish. No, it was Bernie. Bernie selected it.
It's all Bernie.
Yeah.
So yeah, I want to echo something you said earlier, which is that Bernie Sanders truly stands apart among the Democratic presidential primary candidates when it comes to foreign policy in general. And on the question of Iran, like you said, he's the only person who's running who's made it extremely clear that he will do everything within his power to stop the United States from going to war with Iran, and has made it a priority to not contribute to escalating tensions with Iran for precisely that reason. And then I want to talk a little bit about his history as well, because this is not inconsistent with his history. Like you mentioned, it's not a completely uncheckered past. He has a long career as a politician. And so obviously you're going to find some things in there that are somewhat questionable. But my God, I mean, we're comparing completely apples and oranges when it comes to Bernie Sanders versus everybody else who's running for president. And in fact, every other mainstream.
Apples to Domino's Pizza or, something really bad. Yeah.
Really incredible apples to Domino's Pizza. And, even folks like Warren, who I think many people consider sort of assume that she must be a progressive on foreign policy, really doesn't hold a candle to Bernie Sanders in terms of his record on foreign policy. So we want to start with his opposition to American military intervention in Latin America in the 1980s, and how it's very unusual for a mayor of a small town to do this, but he actually created sister cities with cities in Nicaragua and had exchange programs. He went down himself and, witnessed, the protests and marches of the Sandinistas. And, he was very vocally anti-Contra. And so that's sort of how we know that his anti-imperialist and his anti-interventionist roots go very deep. Throughout the 90s, he would often speak out against war and vote against war measures, but there were a couple of inconsistencies that he voted for bombing Kosovo. And then, of course, like everybody else, he, besides Barbara Lee, he voted in favor of the invasion of Afghanistan. But I think that must have been a turning point for him, where he sort of rediscovered a lot of his old, anti-imperialist roots, anti-interventionist roots shortly thereafter, because from then on out, he's been relatively consistent. He voted against the war in Iraq, and has been extremely consistent and vocal about that for a long time. And then, when it comes to more modern situations, we have, he opposed intervention in Venezuela. He denounced the Bolivia coup as exactly that, a coup. And of course, he led the effort to withdraw U.S. military aid to Saudi Arabia for its war in Yemen. And now not only does he have the strongest statement on the assassination of Qasem Soleimani, but he also, with Ro Khanna, it was just announced mere moments ago that they're going to be introducing something into the House and Senate that will stop Trump from being able to declare war on Iran without congressional approval, which is very similar to the approach that he took with the Yemen conflict. So, yeah, this is a pretty sterling record if you are comparing it to the status quo, which is, of course, everybody from, the far right to what's considered the left, shamefully so, is beating the drums of war at every turn. And Bernie Sanders certainly represents a departure from that. And I do think that if you want an anti-war candidate to go up against Donald Trump, who, by the way, has just indicated that he will be a pro-war candidate, if you want an anti-war candidate against a pro-war candidate, you're going to have to go with Bernie Sanders.
You just watched a Michael Brooks show video. Subscribe to get them all. Why wouldn't you? Don't be foolish. Click subscribe below and become a patron as well. Patreon.com/TMBS. Thanks, everybody.